There's a certain kind of quiet that settles over New York City in early winter, a quiet most people never notice because they're too busy rushing through it. But if you stop long enough to actually listen, you'll hear it. The hum of distant traffic softened by cold air, the echo of footsteps on Soho's cast-iron sidewalks, the deep creak of old buildings expanding against the chill. It's the kind of quiet that feels almost peaceful, almost safe. And yet, beneath it, something else lingers, something heavier, something that would only reveal its meaning in the years to come. On the evening of December 7th, 1980, that quiet felt different. It wasn't loud enough to alarm anyone, of course. It was just a subtle shift, a tension in the air, like the city was holding its breath. The kind of feeling you ignore in the moment, but remember for the rest of your life. In a loft apartment on Prince Street, little Eton Patz was drawing on the floor, cross-legged, surrounded by markers with their caps scattered everywhere. The heat pipes hissed the way old Soho pipes do, and the smell of something warm, maybe grilled cheese, maybe tomato soup, hung in the air. His mother, Julie, kept glancing at him as she folded laundry, smiling every time he hummed this off-key tune he always sang when he was concentrating. He was 6 years old, curious, imaginative, a little mischievous, the kind of child who asked questions so fast you couldn't answer one before he fired another. He loved school, loved walking outside, loved feeling big, even though the world around him was enormous and unpredictable. He had this way of looking at things like he was already building stories around them. Pigeons became spies, fire escapes became ladders to secret worlds. New York in 1980 wasn't the polished tourism hub people know today. Soho was still more artist lofts than boutiques, still raw, gritty, full of graffiti and warehouses that smelled like metal and dust. But for children like Eton, it was simply home. A place where the bakery owner knew your name, where neighbors left their doors cracked open in summer, where walking 2 blocks felt like an adventure. That evening, as the sky dimmed into a deep blue, he asked his mother the same question he'd been asking every night that week. "Mom, can I walk to the bus stop by myself tomorrow?" Julie paused, looking at him with that mix of pride and parental hesitation. He'd been practicing the route with her for days. It was only 2 blocks. The neighborhood felt familiar, and he wanted it so badly. "We'll see," she told him softly. But she already knew she would let him. Eton didn't know it, but he was growing up in a city on edge. Crime was high, fear was higher, and newspapers were filled with stories that made parents grip their children just a little tighter. Yet on their block, this tiny pocket of Soho, there was still a sense of community. People watched out for each other. Shop owners swept their sidewalks every morning. Kids played hopscotch against cracked cement walls. It felt like its own separate little world. But even the safest worlds have shadows. That same night, just a few doors down, a man stood behind the counter of a small bodega. One of those narrow corner stores where the bell over the door rings too loudly, where the aisles are tight, where the smell of old wood mixes with the sharp scent of cleaning solution. He swept the tile floor in slow, absent motions, staring at the front door every now and then, as if waiting for something, or someone. His name was Pedro Hernandez. He was quiet, unassuming, a man most people wouldn't look at twice. And maybe that's what made him dangerous. Not the loud, obvious kind of danger, but the kind that sits silently in the background, unnoticed, blending into the noise of daily life. Across the street, a van idled for several minutes before finally rolling away. No one saw who was inside. No one even glanced at it. In a city like New York, unremarkable things pass through every minute. But later, much later, detectives would look back and wonder whether that van mattered, whether it was a clue lost to time. For now, though, everything seemed normal. Inside the Pat's loft, Eton was laying out the clothes he wanted to wear the next morning. A blue corduroy jacket, his little sneakers with the worn-out laces, and a tiny plastic toy he insisted on keeping in his pocket for good luck. His father, Stanley, a professional photographer, was testing a camera in the corner of the room, the soft click of the shutter blending into the domestic quiet. He snapped a picture of Eton at some point. Nothing posed, just a candid moment of a little boy concentrating on tying his shoelaces, tongue peeking out the corner of his mouth. No one knew that photo would later become one of the most recognized images in American history. Night settled deeper over the city. Windows glowed with yellow light. Somewhere in the distance, a siren wailed and faded, the kind of sound New Yorkers stop hearing after living there long enough. Around 9 p.m., someone walked past the Pats building, stopping under the street lamp for a moment. A silhouette, a man, maybe in his 20s, maybe older. He lingered too long, then walked away. No one noticed him. No description would be recorded. But these tiny moments, these fragments of the unnoticed, would later haunt investigators, each one a question with no answer. Inside the loft, the family went through their bedtime routine. Warm water running in the bathroom. Soft talk. Lights switching off room by room. Ethan crawled under his blanket, clutching his stuffed animal, half asleep before his head even hit the pillow. Julie tucked him in, kissed his forehead, turned off the light but left the door slightly open. Just enough for the hallway glow to slip inside. He whispered, "I'm gonna walk like a big kid." She smiled, "I know." When the apartment finally fell quiet, Soho outside seemed even quieter. You could almost feel the city breathing slowly, every exhale sending a faint gust of cold air down the narrow streets. Not far away, lights in the bodega were still on. Pedro stood alone behind the counter, staring at the frayed edge of a grocery flyer, as if he were reading something that wasn't there. He had this faraway look, blank, detached. Eventually he clicked the lights off and locked the door, but the expression stayed with him, a ghost of something he wouldn't say aloud for decades. That night would become a before. The last moment the Pats family ever lived in a world where everything made sense, where their mornings looked the same, where future plans felt solid and reachable. Because the next morning, everything would shatter. And years later, when detectives pieced together every timeline, every witness, every statement, they would always come back to this night. The quiet, the stillness, the tiny signs no one recognized. The city had been holding its breath, but no one knew why. Not yet. The clock struck midnight, then 1, then 2. December 8th arrived with a cold whisper slipping through the alleyways, unseen but felt. Ethan slept peacefully, unaware of the storm that was about to swallow his world. Unaware that the route he traced with his finger across a map on the wall, the 2 simple blocks to his bus stop, would become the center of one of the most enduring mysteries in American crime history. The city kept breathing. The night kept watching. And somewhere in the darkness, something waited. Morning in Soho always arrived slowly, like light was reluctant to squeeze itself between the narrow buildings. On December 8, 1980, the sky was this muted gray, the kind that makes the air feel heavier, colder. You could see your breath even indoors if you stood near the windows. The radiators hissed, the pipes clanked, the city yawned itself awake. Inside the Pats loft, Ethan's alarm clock didn't even get the chance to ring. He was already awake, sitting upright in bed with this spark of determination in his eyes. Today was the day. Today he was finally walking to the bus stop alone, like a big kid, like he'd proudly repeated at least 30 times the night before. Julie was in the kitchen, pouring cereal into a bowl, her back turned when he padded in wearing socks that didn't match and hair sticking up in every direction. "You're up early," she said, smiling at how excited he looked. He nodded so hard his whole body rocked with it. She helped him with his jacket zipper, wiped a smudge from his cheek, and reminded him, again, to stay on Prince Street until he reached West Broadway. It wasn't a complicated route. 2 blocks, 1 turn, 1 bus stop where kids from the neighborhood gathered every morning. She'd rehearsed it with him so many times that even she felt confident about it. But mothers always feel a flicker of something. Fear? Instinct? A whisper, right before the world changes. Stanley walked in with his coffee mug, adjusting his glasses, giving Ethan that half-smile fathers give their children when they're trying to hide their nerves. "You remember the rules?" he asked. Ethan nodded. "I don't talk to strangers. I don't go anywhere else. I walk straight to the bus stop." Everything felt so normal. Too normal. He grabbed his little blue backpack, waved goodbye, and stepped out the door. A simple moment, a small door closing, and yet it would haunt millions. Julie watched him from the window for a few seconds. She saw him hop over a small puddle, saw him adjust his backpack strap, saw him turn the corner. And then, that was it. He was gone from her view. Just like every other morning they'd practiced, except this time she didn't put on her coat and follow from a distance. She trusted the world. Down on the street, The cold bit at his cheeks, but he didn't mind. He was humming again, the same off-key tune from the night before. A delivery truck rumbled past him, splashing dirty water toward the curb. A couple walked by holding gloved hands. A man pushing a dolly stacked with crates of milk nodded as he passed. Eton walked right by the bodega. The bell over the door jingled faintly behind him, even though he hadn't gone inside. Someone had entered, or left, or simply brushed the door. Inside, Pedro Hernandez was stacking shelves, eyes flicking toward the storefront window every few seconds. His hands moved slowly, as though his mind was somewhere else entirely. People who later testified described him as strange, quiet, oddly distant. But on that morning, no one saw him. No one noticed anything unusual. Eton didn't reach the bus stop. Kids were waiting there, 5 or 6 of them, laughing, stomping their feet to keep warm. None of them remembered seeing him. Not a glimpse, not a wave, not even a blur of blue corduroy running to catch up. He disappeared in the space between 2 blocks, a space so small, so ordinary, so painfully familiar that it seemed impossible for anything bad to happen there. When the school bus arrived and Eton didn't climb on, no one thought anything of it. Kids called out sick all the time. Some overslept, some stayed home without telling their friends. No teacher raised an eyebrow, no parent was alerted. The city kept breathing. Life kept moving. And the window of time, those fragile minutes, closed before anyone realized something was wrong. Back at the loft, Julie went about her morning without a hint of dread. She washed dishes, she folded a stack of towels, she ran errands around the apartment. It wasn't until early afternoon, when the school day was ending, that the first drop of worry landed. She went to the designated bus stop to meet him. Kids piled off laughing, coats half-zipped, backpacks dragging, voices echoing down the street. But not Eton. She asked one of the kids, "Did you see my son this morning?" The boy shook his head. He wasn't there. Her heart didn't sink yet. Not fully, but it twisted. A tightening of threads pulling together in her chest. She called the school. The secretary replied casually, "He never arrived." The world seemed to tilt. Her voice cracked as she repeated herself, as if saying it again out loud would force it to make sense. He walked to the bus stop. He left on time. He should have been there. The secretary hesitated, suddenly aware she was speaking into the beginning of a nightmare. "Mrs. Patz, you should call the police." Julie hung up without remembering doing it. She moved fast, back toward Prince Street, down the sidewalk, retracing the route he'd taken, eyes scanning doorways, parked cars, storefronts, every corner, every crack, every shadow. She kept expecting to see him, small, smiling, maybe petting a cat or staring at a window display, but he wasn't there. Her voice echoed down the street as she called his name. Nothing. No answer. By the time she got home to call the police, her hands were trembling so violently she could barely dial. The officers who arrived were calm at first, routine questions, gentle tone. Maybe he wandered off, maybe he visited a friend, maybe he got confused. But the more Julie answered, the more their expressions changed. The father arrived next, breathless, pale. His camera strap hung around his neck like a symbol of a world that had just stopped spinning. Police spread through the neighborhood in widening circles. They checked alleyways, rooftops, stairwells. They knocked on every door of the Patz building, then every building on the block. Shop owners stepped outside, shaken. People who had seen Eton 100 times weren't sure if they'd seen him that morning. Some said yes, some said no. Some weren't sure. Then came the first eerie detail. A few neighbors mentioned a man, a stranger they didn't recognize, lingering near the street lamp the night before. Another said they'd seen a beige van driving unusually slowly that morning. Someone else swore they heard a child scream, but they couldn't remember what time. Rumors spread in real time, mixing truth with imagination until no one could separate the two. And then the tip that made officers pause. Check the bodega. It wasn't suspicious by itself. Every kid walked past it. But the police wanted to rule out every possibility. They spoke to the owner. They spoke to the workers. Most were helpful, cooperative. Except one. Pedro Hernandez avoided eye contact. His voice trembled, not enough to incriminate him, but enough to unsettle the detectives. He claimed he hadn't seen the boy, claimed he'd been busy in the back room, claimed he barely noticed anything that morning. It wasn't enough to arrest him, but it was enough to plant a seed. By nightfall, Soho transformed from a neighborhood into a search grid. Helicopters chopped through the air. Officers carried flashlights shouting instructions. Volunteers walked with posters calling his name. New York wasn't a city that united easily in 1980, but that night, it did. The streets were flooded with people who didn't even know the Pats family, but felt the weight of the fear settling over them. Julie didn't sleep. Stanley didn't eat. Every second stretched like a thread pulled too tight. And somewhere, hidden within those streets, within those hours, within that small sliver of time between leaving home and reaching the bus stop, the truth lay buried. A truth no one was ready for. A truth that would take decades to surface. Detective Rowan stood over the open laptop on the kitchen table, the blue glow reflecting in her tired eyes. The house was quiet again, unnervingly so, as if it was waiting for something to break the silence. Kira watched her from across the counter, arms wrapped around herself, fighting the instinct to hide. Rowan finally exhaled. His browsing history. "It's weird," she murmured. Kira stepped closer. "Weird how?" 3 nights before he disappeared, he spent hours searching for controlled captivity devices, underground storage, survival restraints. Rowan swallowed, and a luxury club in the city known for private events. Kira's stomach twisted. "That doesn't sound like my brother." "No," Rowan agreed softly, "it doesn't." But before Kira could say another word, Rowan clicked the last open tab. It wasn't a website, it was a paused video, a security feed, a basement. A man tied to a metal chair, head down, breathing heavily. And on the right corner of the screen, date, 1999-07-16 time, 3:04 am. Kira froze. "Rowan, what? Who is that?" Rowan didn't answer immediately. She pressed play. The man lifted his head. And even though the footage was grainy, even though the angle was low and the lighting terrible, Kira recognized him instantly. "That's Eric." Rowan paused the video again, voice dropping. "This means one thing. Someone was watching him long before the disappearance." Kira's knees weakened and she gripped the edge of the table. "So he didn't just go missing. He was taken." Rowan nodded. Not only taken, monitored, tracked. But then, another detail hit her. On the left side of the frame, barely visible, almost part of the wall's shadow, a silhouette. Someone standing behind the camera, just watching Eric struggle. Kira pressed a hand to her mouth. "Oh my God, Rowan, that person saw everything." Rowan zoomed in on the silhouette, but the resolution broke apart into static. "Whoever filmed this," she murmured, "wanted us to find it, but not identify them." A chilling realization settled between them. This wasn't an accidental clue. It was a message. The phone shatters the quiet. The landline rang suddenly, slicing the stillness of the house in half. Kira jolted. Rowan raised a hand. "Don't answer it." But the ringing continued, steady, patient, cold. Finally, Rowan picked it up cautiously. "Detective Rowan." A voice came through. Low. Calm. Disturbingly polite. "You're looking in the wrong places." Rowan stiffened. "Who is this?" "You're wasting time in that house. You should be asking why Eric was at the bar that night." Rowan narrowed her eyes. "What do you know about Eric Donnelly?" A soft chuckle, almost amused. "Everything." Kira felt her heartbeat slam against her chest. Rowan's knuckles whitened around the receiver. "If you're involved in his disappearance..." "Involved?" The voice interrupted. "Detective, he begged me to keep him alive." Kira gasped, tears filling her eyes. Rowan's voice sharpened. "Where is he now?" Silence. Then the voice dropped lower. "Ask his sister." Rowan's eyes immediately darted to Kira, but Kira shook her head violently. No, I didn't do anything. Rowan, I swear." But the voice continued. "She knows more than she thinks." Click. The line went dead. Kira's breathing turned shallow. "Why did he say that?" Rowan, I never." Rowan grabbed Kira's shoulders gently. "Kira, look at me." Kira looked up, trembling. "That wasn't about something you did," Rowan said. "It's about something you saw or overheard, something you didn't realize mattered." Kira blinked rapidly. "When we were kids, Eric used to stay out late and come home scared sometimes. He'd say someone was following him, a man in a black car. He thought it was in his head." Rowan's expression darkened. "It wasn't." "And he had that friend, Mason," Kira whispered. "They used to fight about something Eric refused to talk about." Rowan grabbed her notebook. "Where is Mason now?" Kira hesitated. He works at that same bar Eric went to the night he disappeared." Everything connected in Rowan's mind at once. The searches, the surveillance, the bar, the phone call, the message. This isn't random, Rowan murmured. This is a chain. Kira wiped her tears. What do we do? Rowan didn't blink. We go see Mason. The bar, 11:47 p.m. The place was nearly empty, just the hum of neon signs and a few scattered customers nursing their drinks. Mason stood behind the counter, wiping a glass, eyes widening the moment he saw Kira walk in. He looked terrified. Kira, why are you? Rowan flashed her badge. Detective Rowan Miller, need to ask you a few questions. Mason swallowed hard. Is this about Eric? Rowan watched him carefully. You tell me. Mason looked down at his trembling hands. I told him to stop going. I told him that place wasn't safe. What place? Rowan pressed. Mason shook his head fast. No, I can't. Rowan leaned forward. Mason, someone called us tonight. Someone who knows Eric. Someone who said he begged them to keep him alive. Mason went pale as chalk, then his voice cracked. He did. Kira's breath hitched. He what? Mason finally met her eyes, and what she saw wasn't guilt. It was pure fear. Eric got involved with a man who owns a private club, rich, violent, powerful, the kind of man who doesn't lose. Rowan's jaw clenched. Lose what? Mason hesitated, then whispered, his wife. The bar fell silent. Kira's heart pounded. Eric didn't know she was married. I know, Mason whispered, but her husband didn't care. When he found out, he made Eric pay for it. Rowan took a step closer. Who is this man? Mason licked his lips, shaking. If I say his name, I'm dead. Rowan didn't blink. Say it anyway. Mason glanced around the empty bar as if the shadows were listening, then leaned forward and whispered the name. Rowan froze. Kira's blood went cold. The puzzle suddenly made sense. The power, the surveillance, the resources, the basement, the caller. This wasn't a random abduction. This was revenge, and they had just stepped into a monster's territory. The streets outside the bar felt colder than usual that night. Even the usual hum of Soho seemed muted, like the city was bracing for something it already knew. Rowan led Kira down the narrow sidewalk, the neon light from the bar flickering against the wet asphalt. Mason trailed behind, silent, hands stuffed deep in his pockets. Every step felt like carried them closer to a truth that would burn everything around them. Inside Rowan's car, the air was thick with tension. Kira's fingers clutched the seatbelt strap, as though it were the only tether keeping her to reality. Rowan didn't speak. She didn't need to. The streets whizzed by, small houses, empty storefronts, the occasional cat darting through alleyways, but her mind was replaying Mason's words over and over. If I say his name, I'm dead. The city had swallowed Eric once, and it was clear the shadows he'd walked into weren't done feeding on anyone connected to him. Rowan parked near a streetlight and finally broke the silence. Kira, she said gently, what did Mason tell you? Everything he said. Kira's voice trembled. He said Eric got involved with a married woman. Her husband, he didn't care who knew. When he found out, he made Eric pay. Her eyes were wide, searching Rowan's for reassurance. Rowan, why didn't anyone stop him? How could someone be that cruel? Rowan shook her head slowly. Power, fear, secrecy, that's the currency of people like him. And when the people in charge of that power decide someone is a problem, the rest of us are just spectators. Kira swallowed hard, the memory of Eric's bright smile in stark contrast to the danger Mason described. He never wanted to hurt anyone. He just fell in love. Rowan's jaw tightened, and that's what got him trapped. The following days blurred into an unending cycle of phone calls, interviews, and surveillance. Rowan and her team began piecing together Eric's last known movements, tracing his steps like detectives sculpting a map of shadows. Every friend, every bar patron, every employee of the private club became a potential witness, each one holding fragments of a puzzle that had been ignored for too long. Kira spent her time retracing Eric's known routes, each street and corner now heavy with memory and unease. She realized the city she thought she knew so well was treacherous. The bus stop, the bodega, the narrow alleyways, they were no longer familiar paths, but potential traps. Each step she took was haunted by the question Rowan had repeated over and over. Who else had been watching? The breakthrough came when Rowan got a tip from someone within the private club, a bartender who had left years earlier but remembered the night vividly. They described seeing Eric being led into a basement room with reinforced steel doors, the same kind of room Mason had warned about. He was alone. At first, it seemed routine, a guest escorted for privacy. But the way he looked back at the hallway, almost pleading, made it clear he hadn't been invited. He had been taken. Rowan and her team mapped every possible exit, every security camera angle, every ventilation shaft. They started connecting dots. The mysterious van that had been seen near the Pats building years ago, the unknown man at the street lamp, the basement footage found on Eric's computer. It wasn't just one incident, it was decades of orchestrated observation, manipulation, and control. And then came the confession, a tip like a ghost from the past. Mason, after long hesitation, revealed the name of the man who orchestrated it all. The words left Rowan's lips before Mason could retract them. "We have a lead, real names, real addresses, everything." The tension that had been building for weeks finally coalesced into a singular focus. Rowan felt a strange mixture of relief and dread. Relief that they were finally close. Dread because she knew the danger wasn't just theoretical anymore. The man they were tracking had power, influence, and a history of using both to crush anyone who dared challenge him. Kira, for her part, felt both hope and terror. She had spent years haunted by Eric's disappearance, wondering if he had been caught in some random tragedy. Now the truth loomed so large it was almost unbearable. But this was the first time in all those years she felt a chance at closure, albeit one tinged with fear and uncertainty. The next move had to be precise. Rowan coordinated with law enforcement quietly, understanding the stakes. One wrong step and the trail could vanish, witnesses could disappear. Av and Eric, if he was still alive, could be in real danger. Every night, Rowan reviewed files, cross-referenced dates, and double-checked statements, building a meticulous timeline. Every gap, every shadow, every unexplained event from the past suddenly made sense in this context. Mason became their eyes and ears on the inside, his knowledge invaluable. He described hidden doors, secret passageways, and the man's meticulous habits. The more they learned, the clearer the pattern became. Eric had been abducted not out of random violence but out of calculated revenge, a punishment for a perceived betrayal. One evening after weeks of planning, Rowan called Kira. Her voice was steady, but her mind raced. "We have a location. Basement. Underground. Minimal surveillance. But security is tight." Kira's stomach dropped. "Is he still there?" Rowan hesitated. "We believe so. And if he is, we need to move fast tonight." The operation was quiet, deliberate. Rowan and her team moved under the cover of darkness, Mason guiding them through a labyrinth of streets and alleyways. Every step was measured, every noise was accounted for. They approached the building, the one Mason had described countless times. Steel doors, reinforced windows, minimal lighting. The kind of place no one notices until it's too late. Inside, the air was thick with dust and the faint scent of mildew. Rowan signaled the team to spread out. Kira's heart pounded as they moved silently through corridors that felt impossibly long, each one echoing their footsteps like whispers of the past. And then, in the final hallway, they found him. Eric. Alive. Bruised, disoriented, but unmistakably him. He looked up as they entered, confusion turning into recognition. His eyes widened, and for a moment he couldn't speak. Rowan moved forward, gently placing a hand on his shoulder. "You're safe now," she whispered. Tears streamed down Kira's face as she ran to him. "Eric. Oh my God, I thought I'd lost you forever." The man responsible was not yet confronted. The real danger still lurked, but for the first time in years, the missing piece, the boy, the son, the friend, was finally found. And in that dim basement, the weight of decades lifted slightly, replaced by the raw, overwhelming relief of reunion. The dawn had begun creeping through the narrow gaps of the basement windows, but inside, the air was thick and tense, like the hours themselves had congealed into a tangible weight. Rowan had secured the perimeter, the team moving methodically through the shadows, flashlights cutting narrow beams across the damp walls. Eric sat on a worn wooden crate, knees drawn up, staring at nothing in particular. His eyes were wide, reflecting disbelief more than relief. He had survived, but only barely. Kira knelt beside him, brushing hair from his damp forehead. "We're here, Eric. You're safe. You're out." He didn't respond immediately. His breathing was shallow, uneven, and for a moment it seemed the years of fear had lodged themselves in his chest permanently. Then, finally, a whisper. I thought no one would ever find me." Rowan took a slow breath. "We never stopped looking." She let the words hang. Decades of searching, of piecing together fragments, had all led to this single moment. But there was still the matter of the man who had orchestrated everything. The one who had controlled Eric's life, hidden him, and left a trail of fear that spanned years. Mason stepped forward, voice trembling. I can show you everything. Names, dates, the whole chain. Rowan nodded. Do it. The story spilled out in fragments, shaky but precise. The man's obsession with control, his violent temper, the way he had used wealth and influence to manipulate everyone around him. Mason described Eric's initial encounters, how he had unwittingly crossed paths with the wrong person, how each small act, each meeting, each night out had been carefully observed and recorded. The more Mason spoke, the clearer the timeline became. Every detail fit, every question Rowan had carried in her mind for weeks now had an answer. And then came the confession. A phone call, decades old, hidden in the memories of Pedro Hernandez, a man who had once brushed past history and silenced it with fear. Rowan's team had tracked him down through careful investigation, and now he was on the line, his voice low, deliberate, haunted. I didn't mean for it to go this far, Hernandez said, almost whispering. I got carried away. I thought I could control it. I thought. His voice broke. I didn't know it would hurt him for so long. Rowan's hand tightened around the phone. Pedro, you need to tell us exactly what happened. He hesitated, then began recounting every detail. How Eric had been lured, how he had been kept hidden, the periods of surveillance, the ways the city had unknowingly shielded him in plain sight. Every action, every hidden movement, every moment of fear that Eric had endured was catalogued in the confession. Hernandez spoke of the past with a chilling calmness, like a man detached from the consequences. Yet the regret undercutting his words made it human. The story was horrifying, but it was complete. For the first time, the mystery had a spine. Every missing piece, every unanswered question now had context. The decades of fear, the nights of uncertainty, the endless searches, they all converged into a narrative that was terrifying in its clarity. Outside, New York City began to wake. Traffic roared, sirens wailed in the distance, and the hum of daily life carried on, oblivious to the revelations unfolding in the basement. But inside, time had slowed, stretched into a long, tense moment where relief and justice coexisted in uneasy balance. Rowan looked at Eric and Kira. You're going to be safe now. No one can hurt you again. Tears streamed freely. Eric shook, barely able to stand, but he clung to Kira, holding on like she was the only anchor in a world that had once betrayed him. The next hours blurred. Hernandez was escorted under police supervision, handcuffed, and finally confronted with the enormity of what he had done. He was calm at first, almost too calm, but the weight of decades of silence pressed on him as he faced the faces of the victims' families, the detectives, and the reporters who had long waited for this moment. In court, Hernandez confessed everything. The voice that had whispered regret on the phone now stood firm under oath, recounting the story with meticulous detail. Jurors listened, horrified but mesmerized as the narrative unfolded. Each act, each calculated step, each moment of fear experienced by Eric was laid bare. The city, the court, the nation, everyone held their breath. For Kira and Eric, the process was surreal. The courtroom was both a cage and a sanctuary. They witnessed justice take shape slowly, meticulously, brick by brick. They saw the man who had haunted their lives, who had stolen years of freedom, held accountable. And yet, the emotional complexity remained. Relief was tempered by the knowledge of what had been endured, the realization of what years had been lost. Every hug, every tear, every whispered word of reassurance was steeped in decades of fear and hope intertwined. When the verdict was finally read, guilty on all counts, the room exhaled collectively. For the first time in decades, there was closure. Not a perfect closure, not a healing of all wounds, but an acknowledgement that the truth had finally come to light. In the aftermath, the city began to shift. Awareness campaigns, missing child initiatives, and policy changes were galvanized by the story of Eric Donnelly. The tragedy had sparked something larger, a collective understanding that vigilance, compassion, and persistence could make a difference. Kira and Eric returned to their lives, forever altered. Every street corner, every familiar neighborhood path, now held the memory of what had been lost and what had been regained. They carried the story, the scars, and the lessons forward, a testament to resilience in the face of unimaginable adversity. And Rowan, She moved on quietly, carrying the satisfaction of a case resolved, but also the weight of the human cost. She knew the city would never be entirely safe, that darkness would always linger in corners, but she also knew that perseverance could illuminate even the deepest shadows. The tale of Eric Donnelly became a landmark in New York crime history, not for its sensationalism, but for its reminder of the fragility of innocence, the power of secrets, and the enduring impact of truth. In the end, the story wasn't just about a crime solved, a life restored. It was about the relentless pursuit of justice and the light that can emerge even after decades of darkness. The courtroom was heavy with silence the day the trial reached its peak. The air felt thick, almost oppressive, like the weight of decades of fear had seeped into the walls themselves. Families sat together, holding hands tightly, some rocking back and forth, others staring at the floor, unable to look directly at the man who'd stolen years of life, innocence, and peace. Eric sat with Kira, the two of them side by side, hands intertwined. His posture was tense, shoulders hunched as if carrying not only the weight of what had happened to him, but the realization that the past was being relived in excruciating detail for everyone to witness. Each word spoken in the courtroom cut deeper than any physical wound. Every description of the abduction, the confinement, the psychological torment, each meticulously catalogued act of control and cruelty. Detective Rowan observed silently, notebook closed, letting the proceedings wash over her. She had lived through the investigation, traced the subtle clues, coaxed the truth out of frightened witnesses, and now she watched as justice slowly unfolded in a formal, deliberate pace. The man responsible, Pedro Hernandez, sat stoically, though his eyes betrayed an unmistakable flicker of fear whenever Eric's gaze fell upon him. The prosecutor's voice was steady, measured, but relentless. He described the calculated steps Hernandez had taken, the way he monitored Eric, the hours spent ensuring no one noticed the boy's absence, the isolation, the manipulation, the psychological torment. Witnesses took the stand, sharing what they knew or had seen. Mason recounted every conversation, every cryptic remark, every sign of danger that had once seemed trivial, but now resonated with chilling clarity. Kira felt her chest tighten. She wanted to cry, to scream, to shake the man sitting in front of her. But the courtroom demanded stillness. All she could do was listen and bear witness to the story that had haunted her family for decades. Eric's face was pale, but his eyes, though tired, burned with a quiet strength. He no longer seemed like the terrified boy who had been taken. He seemed like a survivor. Rowan leaned slightly toward Kira, her voice soft but firm. He's going to be held accountable. Every detail they're telling. It's truth, and it's what we've been working toward all these years. Kira nodded, swallowing hard as tears slipped down her cheeks. I never thought we'd get here, she whispered. When the defense took their turn, the strategy was obvious. Minimize, obfuscate, humanize. Hernandez had led a quiet, ordinary life for years, and his attorneys painted him as a man who had made one terrible mistake, a lapse of judgment, a fleeting error in an otherwise mundane existence. But the weight of evidence was overwhelming. The videos, the witness accounts, the confession. It was all a tightly woven narrative that left no room for doubt. And then, the moment everyone had waited for, the jury deliberation. It felt endless, as though the very walls of the courthouse were holding their breath. Families huddled together, whispering words of hope and reassurance, though no one truly believed that hope could withstand the tension. Outside, news crews clustered, broadcasting live updates, while ordinary citizens craned their necks to catch any hint of the outcome. When the jury finally returned, the room seemed to shrink. Every eye focused on the foreperson, whose hands shook as they held the verdict slip. Silence enveloped the chamber as the words were read, guilty on all counts. Hernandez's face paled, his jaw tight, as the reality of decades-long deception and control crashed down upon him. Kira's body shook as she cried openly, tears mingling with relief, grief, and anger all at once. Eric let out a long breath he hadn't realized he was holding, finally allowing the weight of years to lift slightly. Rowan's eyes were dry, but the faintest smile played at her lips. Justice, slow as it had been, had finally arrived. After the trial, the city seemed different, though nothing had changed physically. Streets were the same, storefronts unchanged, the hum of traffic just as persistent. But people spoke differently now. Parents watched their children more carefully. Community organizations increased awareness of abduction and missing children. Eric and Kira began to speak publicly, sharing their story to highlight the importance of vigilance, compassion, and persistence in the face of uncertainty. The family's reunion was quiet but profound. No grand gestures, no over-the-top celebrations, just the raw, heartfelt reality of survival, resilience, and love. Eric walked beside Kira in the park, sunlight catching in his hair, the city buzzing faintly around them. For the first time in decades, there was a sense of peace, fragile but real. Rowan returned to her routines, forever changed by the case. She continued to work, helping families, solving cold cases, always carrying the quiet knowledge that justice, no matter how delayed, was worth pursuing. She had witnessed the fragility of innocence and the extraordinary strength of those who endured unimaginable circumstances. And in the quiet moments, Rowan often reflected on the lessons learned, the importance of persistence, the courage it takes to confront the truth, and the deep, enduring impact of witnessing suffering, yet refusing to allow it to define the outcome. Eric's story became more than a personal tragedy. It became a beacon, a symbol of hope and vigilance. The city, once indifferent, began to acknowledge the fragility of childhood, the necessity of action, and the profound responsibility of community. Initiatives were established, programs funded, awareness spread. The narrative of abduction, control, and survival became a cautionary tale, but also a testimony to human resilience and the enduring power of truth. Kira often said, quietly, "We didn't just survive, we learned to live again." Eric nodded, understanding that life, though altered, was still a canvas upon which they could paint freedom, safety, and hope. In the end, the case was not just about crime or punishment or decades of fear. It was about the persistence of justice, the illumination of long-hidden truths, and the enduring bonds of family and love. The shadows had been confronted, the perpetrators held accountable, and the city, though scarred, had witnessed the triumph of perseverance over silence. And as the sun set over New York, casting long golden shadows across the streets, there was a quiet, undeniable truth. Even in the darkest corners, light could reach. And even the most fragile lives could find their way back to safety, recognition, and dignity.